Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. My name's Annie Griffiths, and I have been a photographer for National Geographic since the early, I won't even say, more than 30 years. And I'm going to get this show brought up. But it's been an incredible career. And like most careers, I've grown and had different chapters of my career and have gone from being scared out of my mind, because not only was I one of the first women photographers at National Geographic, I was also the youngest by a good bit when I came. And so I spent the first decade being pretty much terrified that they'd find out that they'd made a terrible mistake and I could absolutely not do this job. But as time went on, I realized that so many of the basics that I'd learned as a kid growing up in Minnesota, and the basics of understanding from living on flatland, understanding light and witnessing moments, and then adding to that third leg of photography, which is composition, was incredibly joyful. And I remember when I was in college and I was first studying photojournalism, I lived in an apartment, and next door was the music room for the University of Minnesota. And so there was a parade of musicians coming in. And fortunately, there was pretty good sound protection, but there was just enough that I could hear the music. And the thing that astonished me, but that really embedded in my head, was that every single musician who came in, before they started really playing, they did a variety of scales. So they do the basic scales that they learned as music students. And then later on, I had a friend who was a classic pianist, and every time he would sit down before he would begin to give a concert, he'd do the same thing. So I realized that I needed to go back into my world of creativity and remember to revisit those scales. And so that's kind of what I'm going to do today. And I call this a low-tech talk because I really feel that we want to have the best gear we possibly can, the best equipment we possibly can. But when you boil it down, it's really what you bring to that little still frame. What you see is your vision. How you present it is your gift. And so I'm going to kind of go through some of those things and talk about how with any camera, anyone can do a better job, do better photography. So this is a picture. This is the only picture I didn't take in here. But I remember seeing this as a young photographer, and I thought, gosh, that's so beautiful. And it's a sewer. It was photographed by my friend Gordon Gahan many years ago, and it's a sewer, and it's beautiful. And it's because of light. So I think sometimes, and as I've been doing portfolio reviews and stuff, I see that sometimes that's the thing we neglect the most, is the light that blesses our images. And so I'm going to first talk about light and how important it is to any photograph. This is a picture I took back in in my beginning photo class. And it was the day I decided to become a photographer. We had an assignment to photograph light, and somehow, I don't remember why, I ended up, it was autumn. I was on the St. Paul, Minnesota golf course. In the fall, you know, there's so much mist and stuff in the mornings, but then when the sun comes up, you get potential for light. So I'm laying on my belly and I'm waiting for the sun to come up, and sure enough, it comes up and it starts shooting these shards of light through the tree. And I was like, oh, yeah, and I'm shooting and shooting. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was actually laying down on the sprinkler system for the golf course. And I was so busy shooting while the sprinkler system went off. And I remember standing up, and I was muddy and wet and really cold and utterly happy because I'd been blessed by light. And I literally went and got on the bus and went back to campus and changed my major to photography. And that same quality of light is still in my images. It comes back. You know, these things that we learn and that move us come back and repeat. And they allow us to stop, to kind of halt in the craziness of trying to get a picture and really see something in a kind of, I don't know, a more profound way, I guess is what I would say. So this is on top of Victoria Falls. And I'd been shooting all day with these guys who, well, it's a long story, but anyway, the falls was running very slowly, and I'd never seen it run slowly. So I was, at first, as we often are, I was disappointed. I thought, well, geez, what am I going to shoot? The river's running slowly. And then I met this guy who was a grounds person at the hotel I was staying at, and I asked him, I said, gosh, I never knew the Zambezi could run this slowly. And he said, yeah, that's, it's the only time you can swim. And I was like, you can what? And it turns out, because nobody swims in the Zambezi, it's full of crocodiles and hippos, but when the water runs this slowly, there is a little swimming hole at the top of the waterfall that only the locals know about. And so I said, well, can I come? So we went out, and we were safe because, of course, the crocs and the hippos won't go this close to the edge of the waterfall. And I took fun pictures all afternoon. But it was when we were leaving. We had to leave because the sun was setting. And I turned around. Please always turn around when you think you're finished. And I looked back, and he was having this silent moment on the top of one of the most beautiful places on earth. And that is one of those rare moments when the light and the moment and the composition all come together, and those are the pictures you're going to carry in your heart forever. But it's everywhere. This is just at a sheep sale in northern England. But without the soft light, without the backlighting, without the thing that ignites that little smoke and allows the mood of the place to shine through, it would not be nearly as strong an image. And the same thing is true if we're shooting wildlife or anything. This is backlight. It's so simple and it's so beautiful. But if you learn to work with it, you find that you can underexpose the person or the creature because the backlight is going to frame them in a really interesting way. So you can really work with that in your exposure and give your biggest attention to the quality of the light and how you want it to look. And sometimes we try to fix light. I'm very low tech. I don't fix much. And I think if we just realize that something that's cool, like a flame eater, in part is cool because of the imperfection of the light and the situation. So you want to try to get it as it is, not flash it, not overpower it, but just work with your camera settings to capture it as it is. Light also has tremendous color. And I think we forget that because actually in the olden days, the film and now, the electronics actually see things differently than our eyes do. Our eyes compensate for things. So remember that those colors, this has not been fooled around with. This is the colors. This is the color of the light on that evening. I don't change pictures. In journalism we don't change reality. It's just like when you process an image, it should be just like you would in a darkroom years ago. You can open up areas and darken down areas and add a little contrast and crop, but you shouldn't be altering the image. Now, if you're not a journalist, you can do anything you want and have a great time with it. The other thing about light is that it is most beautiful when it is least perfect. There's nothing more boring than an empty sky and a sunny day. I had a friend tell me, God, I love living in Los Angeles, every day, a clear sky. And I thought, I'd shoot myself because that's not my idea of, I don't know, just visually, I don't want that. So look for that light that just touches a part of the image you're seeing and let that light lead. You don't have to have every piece of it. Like, there aren't that many pictures where I say, you know, it doesn't matter that we can't see the eyes. But sometimes it actually doesn't matter. And I'm sure some of you have been to the incredible slot canyons in our country. To me, you know, there were all the oranges and all that, but you know, once I got my camera on a tripod, and this is the new LUMIX full frame S series, and I just let it be in the dark and did a little bit longer exposure, the light that was just there was so elegant and so soft. So sometimes we think it's got to be like a sunset or nothing, and actually, you know, the beauty of light is that it comes in all different forms, and a time exposure will, you know, just a little bit of a time exposure even will let that light bring in colors that you're not even seeing with your eye. So I couldn't see this much detail with my eyes, but with a little bit of time, the camera could. And sometimes, you know, you want to do a portrait. If you have the opportunity to do a portrait, be sure to take somebody where the light is interesting. I mean, first take them the heck out of the sun. But also, if you have that opportunity and you see a setting where there's just a little bit of light, and it can be from a leveler blind. You know, Kathy Ryan at the New York Times Magazine has done a whole series just using the leveler blinds in her office. So it's everywhere. This is backstage at a fashion show in Beirut. And again, it's backlighting. It's adding drama to the intensity of these girls getting ready to take the stage. So it's everywhere. And the truth is, in bad light, almost nothing looks good. And in good light, almost everything looks good. And light, you know, soft light is a staple of our job. Looking for, this is in Peru, and it's just open shade. And I have to tell you, if you're if you're dealing with a sunny day, as this was, and if you're dealing with darker skin, you want to make sure that you are out of the direct sunlight and working, if possible, with open shade. So there were a bunch of women weaving outside this little alcove, but it was really hard to photograph them because the light was pretty crummy. But she was tucked into a corner under a little roof, and the light on her was just stunning. So watch for that if you've got a choice. Go to the place where the light is going to make your image stronger. This is just the open door of a school in Kenya. You know, window and door light is beautiful. And so use it and enjoy it. This is in a hut in Tanzania. And you see that when you allow that soft light, you see every detail of her very dark skin. And there's even a little fly on her top lip. And nothing gets blown out, and it renders the beautiful tonality of her skin. And everything beyond, that's the other thing, is it looks like a studio picture, because if you have people in just a very single source of light, and then everything else behind them is interior and dark, suddenly it's like they're sitting in a studio. And it's really easy to do. I've done it in, you know, the front door of a house in Houston, and I've done it in a zillion other places where you just find the open shade and photograph, letting the background go completely dark. This is in a hut in northern England. Very same thing, just soft light. And look how the eyes pop, you know. And also when people are kind of out of the sun but looking toward the sun, you'll often get this little catchlight in their eyes, which is, it just feels more intimate. Now, even if you're going to do kind of a fun picture, I did this picture years ago to wake up the editors at National Geographic, because I had proposed a story and they let me do it, but they all thought I was out of my mind. And it was a story on North Dakota. And I knew that North Dakota was fantastic and so interesting, and had, you know, I wrote a great proposal, and they go, okay. And I remember one of one of my photographer friends at Geographic offered to lend me his 3-foot ladder for my aerials. But I knew that at the end, after you do a story, they assemble all of the editors and you present your finished story in concert with your picture editor. And it's really scary. It's really scary because everybody in that room is basically seeing you naked and they're perfectly okay to say, don't love it. And so anyway, I knew I sort of needed to wake them up and help them understand. So I did this picture in the Badlands of North Dakota, knowing that it would never run, but because it's completely art directed. But what I did is I was looking and looking in the Badlands for one of these curvy roads, and I found one. And then I went over and I got a cowboy from a ranch nearby, and I asked him if he could please be in my shot that night. He goes, okay. So I said, you're just going to need to ride your horse over, to that big old rock. He goes, yep, I know that rock. I go, if you can ride your horse on over there. But wait, get it, it's going to be when it's almost pitch black dark, okay? Okay. So then I set my camera up on the hillside, and I just put it on bulb. And this is back in the film days. So I just put it on bulb and put it in when he was in place. I opened the camera, I ran down the hill, I got in my rental car, and I drove it up the road and out of sight, and then I turned around off camera, and I drove it back, and then I parked it behind the rock because I knew the headlights would be so bright that they'd blow things out. So then I parked it behind the rock and ran down and laid on my belly and shot a strobe behind the cowboy. And then ran up to my camera, turned it off, and I did it about 10 times. Because you couldn't see anything. You didn't know if you were getting it. And the poor cowboy was so sorry. He said yes, because he was freezing to death. But I had to stop because the police showed up because somebody said, somebody's doing something real weird in the Badlands. And not all of our assignments are like lovely. Or, this was a National Geographic assignment to photograph this rock. And of course, it's interesting because it was carved so long ago and, it's got historic significance. But this is not going to get published. And so I thought, well, what does it need? What does it need? And what do you think it needs? Light. Yep. So I just stayed till dark, and I had a little pen light flashlight, and I made this picture of it. And that is, seriously, it is a very sophisticated tool called a pen light flashlight, and painting with it, for 1 minute and then 2 minutes, and then, And again, it was on film, so I couldn't see it. But a lot of that playfulness and just trying something, don't overcomplicate it, just try it. It's very fun to do, and you'll surprise yourself with how. And of course, it's much easier now because you can look at the picture and go, well, that didn't work, and do the next one. But we forget that light moves. I remember I was asked to photograph this church in Vermont on Christmas Eve, and they wanted to show because they were still lighting it with candles. Well, this is, there they are. There's the church. There's the candles. And then I finally thought, well, what makes candles beautiful is that they move, that they flicker. And so I did a different picture, just allowing time to let the candles flicker and create a more interesting piece of light. So it's just a small image, but you guys can all do this kind of stuff. This is in Cappadocia in Turkey, and I wanted to photograph this hotel that's made out of the rock formations there. Some of you may have been there. It's really cool. But I don't know, I had a crappy sky, and there wasn't going to be a sunset, so I just waited until it got a little bit darker, and the lights of the hotel started to come up. And eventually there's that magic time when the sky really goes blue and there's a balance between the ambient light and the artificial light. And again, you see the colors of the light. So you can do this with a farmhouse. You can do it with your own house, if you want to do it kind of a neat image. It's very, very simple to do. But what I tell people is start before you think you need to. Like start taking pictures before you think it's in balance, because it's only in balance for just like 30 seconds. And then suddenly it'll tilt in the other direction. It's something as simple. This is in Sydney, Australia, and this park was great. And at the time I was there, it was on the chopping block. They always try to take it down because it's on some of the best real estate in Sydney. But people love it because it's just kitschy and old and stuff. But at night, it's more special. It evokes that feeling. Now, a lot of these can be done without adding much light, maybe some, maybe none, none. So be aware of shooting at different times of day in order to get across a feeling that you want to impart. Now, I'm sure everyone here has heard about the rule of thirds and basic composition, and that you want to divide that frame into thirds, and special credit if your important subject falls where the lines intersect. You get, extra points. But the funny thing is we forget, once we get used to it, we forget how important it is in every kind of image to have a sort of basic compositional structure. So even in a picture like this, if you take a look at it, it's amazing where those lines do fall in the pictures that we end up loving. And I don't know what it is about the human brain that likes this kind of balance, but it really is true. So today when I was reviewing portfolios, I was reviewing a couple where people were really relying on that center focus in their camera to get everything in focus, and they were sacrificing composition just so that center focus would make sure their picture was in focus. And so we were talking about, no, you don't let the camera make your compositional choices. The camera makes enough choices. Really get comfortable with moving that point of focus around and making sure that what you want in focus is where that falls. And it's everywhere, when you start looking at your own pictures, you'll see it. You'll see that the ones that you like best usually have this basic compositional structure. And it's like in this situation, I was framing up the wall in Mexico because it was so beautiful, but it was a little empty. And then I just started waiting for people to walk through. But I knew exactly where I wanted to click the shutter if a person walked through, so that it would be complementary to that structure. So keep that stuff in mind. It's fun, but it's also, you have to be disciplined and thoughtful about what you're doing. And that's why good photography takes time. I always say it's not a drive-by shooting. It's an investment of your time and your energy and your art and your heart. This was a little lady in Italy, and I was assigned to photograph, believe it or not, the funeral industry in Italy. And I went to this little cemetery, and I loved it because all the people were buried in drawers, and their pictures were there, which I think, don't you want your picture on your drawer? And this little lady, I was watching her. She was walking around with this blue detergent bottle full of water, and she was watering all her friends' plants. And at one point, she came over, or I went over to her, and I asked her in my appallingly bad Italian if I could take her picture. And she said yes. And with that, she walked over and stood in front of these two empty drawers and assumed this pose. In situations like that, you're like, oh my gosh, So, I photographed her, and afterwards she came up to me and asked me if I could, and I finally understood, could I send her this picture for her grave? And that explains her pose. This is completely her way, the way she wants to be seen in the future. And even with wildlife, that same structure is there. And especially with wildlife, I think we so badly want to get it that we forget everything. It's wildlife and aerials where people become idiots with their cameras. They just shoot. And they forget that, to bring any kind of knowledge to the party. But you'll see that if you do, you're going to get more interesting photographs. And so first take the bad ones, but then get serious, and then really try to get an image that's going to have some basic energy that comes from the right composition. Wherever you are. This was my niece at an aquarium. And this was last month in Antarctica. So try things. I I know we all get excited when we get an opportunity to photograph something cool, but then slow yourself down and try different things to see what's going to make the picture that means the most to you. This is a leopard seal. One of these leopard seals actually bit holes in 5 of our zodiacs. There's something. You know, if you have a great sky, use it. You know, and if you have a crappy sky, get away from it. You know, that just know that the horizon is the strongest line in almost any composition if you're outdoors. It's that horizon. So be mindful of where you put it, because usually, and everything I'm saying is meant to be forgotten at times, that there are no hard and fast rules, of course. But, you know, if you put your horizon dead center, chances are you're going to find the picture feels a little flat. And we do it a lot. So, you know, here it's like I'm getting down under the sunflowers in order to make this composition. And something else that's funny is I was never good at math in school, but I'm telling you, there is so much geometry in photography. It kind of bums me out, actually. But I was talking to my granddaughter the other day, and I was explaining to her, because she's studying geometry, 2nd grade geometry, and I said, okay, so look at this picture of the penguins. Look how many triangles are in there. You don't think about that when you're shooting, but it's what's going to catch your eye, and follow that instinct to capture it that way. Well, she loved it. She said, can I take it to 2nd grade? And I said, yes, you may. But the leading lines in an image can be anything. And sometimes they're like this. They're triangular. Sometimes they're like this. They're horizon. And other times, this is a man davening in Jerusalem. But that leading line is going to be a great friend to you, because it can take the viewer through the image in the way that you want, and it can help you put emphasis on the subject itself and what you want to bring the eye to. This is a perfect example, and believe me, I wasn't thinking about geometry when I shot it, but can you see how many triangles are in this leading line that's taking us from this little boy to his grandpa in the back? And then look at the curved lines of his lariat. Well, I didn't realize this for years, but you know how sometimes somebody will tell you something about your pictures that you never saw yourself, you weren't really aware of? And somebody years ago said, you are really drawn to a curved line. And I went, I am? I didn't know that. I don't think so. I don't think I am. Well, I am. And you can learn this about yourself too, that you're going to be drawn to a certain kind of structure in your pictures. And when you look at them in a group, sometimes that structure you're not even aware of is going to come to you. And that's the time to embrace it, but also go, okay, am I in a rut here? Am I in a curve rut? These are white pelicans in the Gulf of Mexico. But the truth is, you can use all of these. They're like tools. They're like lenses. They're like, people used to say, why do you have so many different emulsions in the film days? Why do you use so many different kinds of film? And I'd say, well, it's because like sometimes you need a screwdriver, and sometimes you need a hammer, and they're part of your, kind of your toolbox. And so are these different elements that make up a photograph. You can use those lines to, like here, they just are embracing these fishermen. And so it takes you right to the fish. And here, this yucca is dead center. But because the horizon's low and the other elements are in there, it kind of works dead center. Or you might say, doesn't work, Annie. But because it's a very individual thing. But you can break these rules in many ways. And even, this is just a little fur seal in Antarctica. But when I saw it, I went, oh, there it is again, me and my curves. Maybe because I don't have any myself. This is an Ngorongoro crater. You know, that's the other thing when you're photographing wildlife. Remember that sometimes a picture's more powerful if you see the animal in its setting. Closer isn't always better. Closer is fun, but mix it up. You know, try a lot of different things. And to me, the Ngorongoro crater is such a sacred place, and it's such a safe place for these elephants with their gigantic tusks because they can't be poached. And, that I wanted to show that. And these are killer whales in Antarctica. Sometimes, I find myself just wanting to make a new picture. I want to take a subject that people have photographed a lot and just sort of find a new way of seeing it. And you can get kind of, poetic, even with a really straightforward subject. So I wanted these pictures of killer whales to be the opposite of killer. I wanted them to be orcas. And you can kind of do that with your choices, your visual choices. Icebergs, oh my gosh. And here you can see I've broken every rule. Horizon's dead center, subject's dead center. But it's sort of the symmetry of the iceberg and its reflection that allows this to work anyway. This is the Taj Mahal, and I remember when I got there like the first person through the gate. I was, so excited. And then all these people showed up. Other people came to the Taj. It was very irritating. And I remember being like, I can't take a picture because there's a person. And then I went, so use the people, Annie, use the people. And so then I just started shooting a reflection in one of the reflecting ponds and waiting until the figures made a composition. It's the kind of people as objects. And details can be so much fun, especially where you can't quite get your footing, you can't quite tell exactly, is that two or one, who's in front, who's behind. Be playful with your photography. And the thing that photographers want most of all, most photographers are going for, is moment. It's the third and the toughest thing to get. But it's like touchdowns, It's really where you go, oh, I got it. Try not to immediately look at the back of your camera so that you miss the next 3 moments. It's not a good idea. In fact, have you guys ever heard the word chimping? For those of you who haven't, that word's evolution came because when the first digital cameras came out, and the first people to have them were newspaper photographers who were often in a press pool, because it was a way that they could instantly get those pictures back and meet their deadlines. And so it was a group of photographers, I believe at the White House, where something happened, they all shot, and then as soon as it was over, they all flipped their cameras down, and they were all going, ooh, 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 ooh. And that's where the word chimping came from. So chimp not if things are still going on, because you're going to miss so much. And it'll still be there, 3 minutes later. But to get moments, you got to get in there. If you're going to photograph, this is in Beirut, if you're going to photograph the ride, be on the ride, If you're going to be with kids, be on your knees. Be down in there with them. Don't stand up and shoot from a distance. Get yourself, and that's why I love wide-angle lenses so much. And the new zoom lenses are so good. And it also lets you work lighter, and so you're less intimidating, which you want as a photographer. Get on the camel, get on the elephant, do it all, get on the motorcycle. Be careful on the motorcycle. But so much of capturing active moments is that. It's like going for it. The other night when Liverpool won, my son and I, we came out of the sports bar and we heard this roar of a crowd down, I forget which street, not far from here. Anyway, all the Liverpudlians had poured onto a street, were blocking traffic. And I was not on assignment, but I heard it, and Charlie and I just ran down the street toward it. And then I'm just, without even thinking about it, I'm in the middle of them. I'm laying on cars. I'm, to get pictures of these guys celebrating this soccer victory. But that's like fun. So make sure you're doing it. This picture was taken in Jerusalem because I knew on Good Friday there were groups that would come from different parts of the world, and they would dress as Christ and his followers, and they'd have a cross, and they'd go do the way of the cross. And so in trying to find out who was doing it, there was a group staying at a hotel, and what I said to them was, where do you get ready? Because I always like to show before an event and after. Where do you get ready? And they said, at the hotel. I'm like, okay, so you go into those outfits at the hotel. And I said, well, how do you get to the old city? And they said, we take the bus. I'm like, I need to be on that bus. So that anticipating things, too, to find new images is really important. I was doing a thing on pregnancy and fertility, and the best exercise at that time for pregnant women, I think it's still true, it was aqua aerobics. And so, these poor women are pregnant, and I'm like, can I photograph you in your swimming suits? So I came in my maternity suit, and with, I had goggles and a snorkel and an underwater camera and everything. I looked so ridiculous, they didn't mind at all. This is in Australia, just get in there. It's so fun. This is in Buenos Aires, where a tango performance, and you can see I'm on my belly, because the only way I could shoot it without interfering in any way was there was this little hole at the bottom of the back curtain. So I'm laying on my belly with my camera lens pointing out, shooting from that angle. And it was just really fun, because tango's so much about legs. And this is on South Beach. So often we're trying, as journalists, content's really important, and we're trying to tell a story. So the story here was about the saving of South Beach, because it was in terrible decay until the fashion industry kind of discovered it and started shooting down there, and that brought back a lot of tourists, and so I was just shooting a shoot. And this is a little girl who punctured 5 of our zodiacs. This is in Patagonia last December when I was working with gauchos. And this is in a refugee camp in Thailand. But you see for moments how important it is to be close to people. I talked to a number of you in portfolio reviews yesterday and today about, giving up that telephoto lens. It takes beautiful pictures, but if you want intimacy, you have to get close to people. And if you want insightful photographs, you need to be close to people. You need to earn it. Because, for me, in addition to moments, the thing I'm looking for beyond moments is intimacy. And intimacy absolutely has to be earned. So this is a moment. I was in a park in Vancouver where all the brides go to be photographed. And I was with a bridal party, and they were perfectly nice and everything. But I looked across the park, and I saw this pair coming. And so I just ditched my bride. I went booking across the park, because these guys were laughing and having such a good time. And so this is a moment, but they were laughing so hard that they fell down. And this is intimacy. And that's what we want to go for. We want, whether it's with wildlife or, we want to go for something that shows a deeper emotion, a deeper truth among people. This was a picture I took on my very first assignment for National Geographic. But the intimacy is created by just standing back and letting this biologist and this deer be in a little puddle of light. And sometimes you have to make that decision. Sometimes the decision is get closer. Sometimes the decision is step back. These are giraffe. This is with this unbelievable LUMIX lens. It's a 100 to 400, but it's a mirrorless, so it's a 200 to 800. And there were other photographers around, and they had these enormous lenses they were schlepping around. And I had this little camera with this little lens, and they were like, "Yeah, you're really a professional, you know." But it was amazing. So sharp, so clear. This is intimacy in an operating room. You know, you can find it anywhere if you get yourself in the right place and you just wait for something to happen. And here, this little baby had been monitored through the pregnancy because she had a growth on her little tuchus, and they were monitoring to make sure it didn't grow quickly. And so as soon as she was born, they rushed her into the operating room and took the tumor off her bum. And I was on my knees, of course, that's what you want to do when you're with kids. And I was so touched by the gentleness of all the physicians and nurses that were taking care of her, because she was just literally, taking her first breaths. But they got it, and it was not cancerous, and she's just got a cute little dimple on her butt. Even elephant seals can be intimate. And when people are together, if you can just be with them for a while, and again, these are children, so I'm actually down below them. I'm on my own bum. And you just let them do their thing. When kids are not directed, they just do magic stuff. And so it was a darling picture, but then suddenly this little boy on the right turned his head sideways into the sky, and it was just beautiful. That light in the eye, that catch light, is something that will really make a critter come alive, human or not. And this was actually the very end of Ramadan, and I was inside the Dome of the Rock, and the fast breaks when the sun rises, and the women were gathered near the window waiting for the sun. And this is the exact moment that the sun came up and kind of kissed the forehead of this little girl. And, you can see how imperfect the light everywhere is. And there's even a big old plastic bag in the window, but you don't even see it because you're so pulled into what the light is doing. This was in Montana. There's certain people when I've worked especially with ranchers and farmers and stuff, where they have the most beautiful relationships with their animals, that they count on, and capturing that is just another side of the tough old cowboy. And here, this is just focusing on the snow instead of the penguins, and play with things like that, because it's fun. And there are certain shapes that they don't need to be sharp. You know exactly what you're looking at. And these are lions in the Serengeti. Hey, here's a tip. If you're going to go on safari, go around the rainy season. Because when it's hot, the animals, you go out early in the morning, and then the animals you find a lion, and it's under some old branchy tree for 6 hours, and, but if it's cold or wet or not sunny, the animals come out to warm up, and they're much more social with each other. So if you're going to go to the Serengeti, go in March, because, and also the land is green and there's not all that dust, and but there's just a magical kind of, activity that happens during those cooler, rainier months. And sometimes it's a piece of the situation that will really impart the information. This was about the toll that salt was taking on the little girls who do the salt mining in India. Apart from this, I do a tremendous amount of work with women and their children in the developing world. And these are two nuns at a monastery in Tibet last January, and there was just something so sweet to me about how warm they are with each other, and that they're both doing what we're all doing, is looking at something on their cell phone. This is a little boy after the earthquake in Pakistan, and his entire village of 35,000 people were killed, and they were now living in a tent city. And I was walking back from shooting some other stuff, and I saw him, and I thought, his mom said, "Okay, sweetie, it's almost bedtime. Go brush your teeth." And again, but you see how you have to be down on his level. You can't. But it was such I look for these human moments that we all can relate to within families and within different, realities. And to really bring, to tell a story, you need to bring all of your tools to the party. This is just a little quick story of gauchos in Patagonia that I shot last December. And, great sky, use it. This guy was coming back. He was rounding up the horses and bringing them back to the corral. And then, it was so clear to me that these gauchos they could do anything. I mean, if anything bad happens, I would like to be with a gaucho, because they're so self-sufficient and strong and everything. But they're also quiet and kind of gentle, so they were just pulling in the ropes. And they're teaching, little gauchos how to be with animals, how to respect them, how to quiet them. And also how to, quickly bring them down. In this case for branding, this is a wild horse, a wild stallion. And it looks like the horse is suffering here. I'm telling you, they did this so gently, and bringing the ropes around. And it took like 1 second, and then he's down, and they're calming him down, and they get the branding done, and boom, he's gone. So it was extraordinary to behold their understanding of animals. And then I thought they had water in their little, oh no. Want a drink, Annie? Mm-hmm. Oh! With an incredible tenderness with their kids and with their families. And so you want all those pieces in order to tell a story. You want the insights and the moments and the scene setters and the details. This is a little story I did on the Annapolis graduation. And everybody, this is mandatory shot. You got to have this shot. Everybody's got to have the shot of the, But my goal was to show that at that time, this was a while ago, that it was the first time that there was real diversity at Annapolis. And I really wanted to show that, because it didn't used to be that way. And so I was really looking for the moments of pride and participation. And you want to show it in many different ways. The first women were graduating from Annapolis. And I always try to look for things that aren't going to hit you over the head with it, but there it is. Because it makes it more real. It's not controlled. And then the boy gets the girl. But the class coming up, they have this test for them, and they have to, they have a greased obelisk just covered in lard. And the whole class has to work together to build this human mountain to get somebody to the top, to get this cap off the top of the monument. And if they get it, then they can go on to be seniors, or I think it is. Anyway, they go on to the next level. And it's just so fun to watch, and to watch all these kids. And it's really hard. I mean, it takes them like an hour at least to get up there. I'm going to finish with a story that I shot way out in the American West. And it was one of those things where I don't know how many of you have been to a real cattle branding, but it's like the biggest day on a ranch. And I was invited to cover one, so I went out there. And it was such a remote ranch that there was no possibility of even staying in a motel anywhere nearby. So they invited me to stay at the ranch house. And I said, oh, that was really nice, and I arrived and met the family, and I went to bed. And I woke up in the morning because this beautiful pre-dawn light was coming through the window. And I looked out the window and I saw this mackerel sky, which I love mackerel skies. And I realized, man, if I get down there fast, because the horses were in the pasture and the sun was going to come up and the sky was fabulous. And I grabbed my camera and I ran down to the fence, and then this horse came right to me, just came right to me. And I'm shooting and I'm having a great time. And then, eventually the sky melted and it was over. And I remember, I just remember going, whoo! This. And then I turned around, and that's when I saw like 4 or 5 cowboys leaning up at the fence looking at the crazy lady from National Geographic. And that's when I realized I was in a t-shirt and underwear because I'd been so excited about the sky and the horses and the sunrise and everything that I just grabbed my camera and forgot to put my pants on. And I like to tell that story because honestly, this is what I wish for you. That you get so lost in your photography that, I'd much rather have you go pantless than fall off a cliff. But and then this is just a little group of pictures from the day, because whenever I cover anything, I try to do a picture story within that one assignment. Because you never know what the editors might need or use, and it's more fun to look at your subject from different points of view. This guy was driving the what do you call this? Not the stagecoach, the lunch thing. The chuck wagon, yes, thank you. And it's everybody's there, generations, everybody's eating, everybody's working. It's just really, really fun. And this little guy came up to me in the morning, and he came up to me, he was 7, I remember, and he said, "You won't see me wrestle a steer?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I do. I do. But, they're just bringing the cattle in, but I promise today I'm going to come take a picture of you wrestling your steer." So toward the end of the day, I went and found him. And I said, "Okay, buddy, let's go. I want to see you wrestle your steer." So he walked over to this little calf, and he, wrestled and wrestled and wrestled. And the calf never moved an inch. Now, and you can see how sweaty he is. And so I said to him, "Well, hey, buddy, does your calf have a name?" And he said, "Yup, his name's Michelangelo." And now I'm impressed. I'm like, whoa, out here in the middle of the American West, these parents are obviously great parents because he names his calf after one of the greatest artists that's ever lived. And then he said, "I've got some other ones back at the barn named for the other Ninja Turtles." Thank you very much.